You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Fred Childers. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. Well, the Commander-in-Chief used a visit to Louisiana this week as an opportunity to defend his call for a border wall. Harrison Golden was there as the shutdown standoff continues.
Hey guys, well, this marks the second time President Trump has addressed the nation's farmers at the American Farm Bureau's National Convention. Mayor Cawley spoke last year in Nashville, but the circumstances this time around here in New Orleans quite different, as a trade war persists with China, and what is now the longest federal government shutdown in American history leaves major resources for farmers in limbo. The president with a relatively warm reception here, though, as he touched on changes to North American trade, estate taxes, and immigration policy.
You know, when we have proper security, people aren't going to come, except for the people we want to come, because we want to take people in to help our farmers, etc. Very important. We're going to make that actually easier for them to help the farmers, because you need these people.
Though for all of the president's comments here at the convention center, perhaps it was what he said offstage on Air Force One that best encapsulates the tensions 1,000 miles away. The president saying he received a suggestion from Republican Senator Lindsey Graham to reopen the government while Democrats and Republicans negotiate that southern border wall. The president telling reporters that that idea is a non-starter. In New Orleans, for your local election headquarters, I'm Harrison Golden.
Now, we talked with political analyst John Couvion about the ramifications of Trump's visit and his speech. That interview is coming up a little later on in the show. With the debate over the wall primarily being about funding, one Louisiana senator came up with a unique idea to fund the wall without taxpayer money or a vote from Congress. I talked to Senator Bill Cassidy by phone to get the details on his plan. I'm on the phone with U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy. Thanks for coming on, Senator.
Hey, thank you for having me. Very pleased. Thank you.
You bet. You have suggested using money seized by Mexican drug cartels to help fund the border wall, and I think you had quoted somewhere around like $4 or $5 billion a year that we could glean from that. So I guess my first question would be, how would that work, since that money right now, I think, goes towards the law enforcement agencies and with, you know, to help with manpower and equipment?
Yes, there is some of the money which is currently unobligated. About $1.2 billion currently is unobligated in one of the two funds. I think there's about $300 million in the other. But that said, you'd want $4 to $5 billion a year. So one of two things: either of those things currently covered by this fund would have to be covered out of a congressional appropriation, or ideally you increase the amount that you confiscate. One thing I've been concerned about: cartels move about $100 billion a year out of the United States to other countries from illicit activity. We only get about $10 billion of it. We're getting 10% of $100 billion. If we get more of it, it's a greater crimp, if you will, a greater slam to the cartel's business model, but also gives us more money to do things to defeat them. So I'd also like to increase the activities which confiscate this money.
So have you talked to President Trump about your idea?
I have talked to President Trump about my idea. We had a personal phone call probably about, last weekend, I think, or last week. And he's open to it, but he would like to have a congressional appropriation. I'm looking for some way to go forward. I want the government open. I want the wall built. I want our southern border secure. So I'm trying to float other ideas.
So if he wants congressional appropriation, what does that mean going forward? Are you going to have to get it through a committee?
Well, he wants to go through the traditional way in which Congress appropriates money. The nice thing about this is that Congress does not appropriate money in the asset forfeiture fund. It is rather money the executive branch controls by itself. And so we could use this money without congressional approval. And so the way forward, even if Ms. Pelosi decides that she is not as interested in securing the southern border. And by the way, the reason I like it, as I've said before, in this case, it's not the Mexican government nor the Mexican people. It's not the American people. It is the Mexican cartels paying for the wall. And that would be such sweet justice.
And so with this plan, you wouldn't even need
you wouldn't even need the House of Representatives to sign off on this.
Correct. This could be done now. One thing that we added to this, taking from what we've done in Louisiana, we've done this in another setting, is to allow, and this would take legislation, which would allow the executive branch to bond out future receipts. Every year we get at least $3 billion, and usually about $5 billion from confiscation of these illicit monies. So if you pass legislation allowing this to be bonded out, then you could bond out the future receipts. We've done that in Louisiana with coastal restoration money, so I know it can be done. And that, so you still would need the cooperation of Congress, and that's where the compromise comes in.
Do you sense any urgency from Congress to end this shutdown?
Oh, yes. But Pelosi holds all the cards. Pelosi holds all the cards. She could just today say, okay, you get $3 billion or $5 billion. And $5 billion in the federal budget is a rounding error. She could end this shutdown today just by giving money that Democrats have previously voted on, and not as much as they previously voted for, to end this impasse. But she won't. And so that's why I and others are trying to find a way forward to both secure the southern border, but to get federal employees getting paid and back to work.
What do you think the chances of your plan being adopted by the president are?
Right now I'm just working it. Ask me in a week and I'll find out from my colleagues. I've received very positive feedback from a number of them after my appearance on Fox. And Mark Meadows, who is head of the Freedom Caucus on the House side, has expressed support for a similar idea. Now, any Democrats. But again, I tell folks, if you're a Democrat and you're in a district with 55,000 federal employees, as some of them have, don't you want the government open? And if you're a Democrat who just took a Republican's place and you promised you'd be tough on securing the southern border, don't you want a solution? So I'd like to think that people can move beyond partisanship and find a solution, and that's what I'm attempting to do.
Well, we wish you guys luck as you attempt to end this government shutdown. I hope the best for you guys. And U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks again for having me.
You bet.
And by the way, we will ask him in about a week if President Trump has accepted his plan. Now, the shutdown is also impacting breweries. Amber Smith explains why you won't see new brews on tap until the shutdown is over.
Between playoff football and the kickoff of carnival season, beer sales are flowing.
Festival season is just huge for us.
But the partial federal government shutdown has area brewers worried.
As the executive director of the Louisiana Craft Brewers Guild, I'm hearing a lot of comments, a lot of concerns about how this is affecting each and every individual licensed brewery in the state.
The agency that oversees beer production and distribution is shut down. Some breweries had new ideas for spring products, but without licensing, the ideas are staying bottled up.
That's a big deal for breweries releasing new labels that are going to cross state lines.
This shutdown also means anyone who was hoping to hop into the brew business will have to wait, but the bills keep coming.
Those breweries that are in the planning stages that can't get that first kind of domino to fall from the federal government, that's a big issue for breweries who are keeping lights on and have rental space that have planned to be open sometime in 2019.
There are currently 38 breweries in Louisiana, and 6 or 7 of those ship products out of the state. The Louisiana Craft Brewers Guild says this shutdown will impact all of them in one way or another.
The beer trails that we have going on in Louisiana are a growing passion of in-state and out-of-state visitors. So I think we're seeing a very high time for breweries, and this kind of speed bump is definitely going to impact us. I don't know how the ripple effect will happen, but I know that we'll be feeling this for quite some time.
He says he hopes this gets resolved sooner rather than later so Louisiana can keep brewing up this growing industry. For your local election headquarters, I'm Amber Smith.
And leaders with the Louisiana Craft Brewers Guild also worry that even when the government reopens, there will be a backlog of requests that will continue the road bump for the craft brew industry. Well, another Republican candidate could soon be jumping in the race for Louisiana governor to challenge John Bel Edwards in October. John Fleming works as a doctor in Northwest Louisiana. If he looks familiar, it's because he spent 8 years representing Louisiana's 4th congressional district. Sources close to Fleming say, quote, he's seriously considering entering the race for governor. He's currently discussing it with family and friends, and he's praying over it. Fleming would be the third Republican candidate. U.S. Representative Ralph Abraham and Baton Rouge businessman Eddie Risponi have announced their candidacy. Coming up next, we're talking to a political analyst about President Trump's visit to New Orleans. After that, we'll talk to a state representative who was on a list of nominees for a federal judgeship, but not anymore. That's next on your local election headquarters.
This is your local election headquarters.
Well, we're going to continue our coverage of President Donald Trump's visit to New Orleans last Monday. John Couvion with JMC Analytics and Polling is here to provide some analysis. Thanks for coming on the show, John.
Good to be here today.
Okay, so we know that he talked a lot about the government shutdown, and it's the longest government shutdown that we've experienced. What are the political ramifications of the shutdown? Are there winners and losers so far?
Absolutely. There's really a short-term and a long-term component to it. Short-term, I would say President Trump's going to get the majority of the blame because he took ownership of the shutdown early on. Politically, that was not a wise move. Long-term, what's going to happen is if there's not an attempt by either side to come together to provide a solution to reopen the government, I think that both sides, the President and Congress and Republicans and Democrats, will all take a hit, because then the public's going to say, why aren't you guys working together to solve the problem? Yeah. And the thing is, you're already starting to have some impacts in terms of longer airport lines, the issues of mortgages not closing and so forth because of the federal government not being open. So like I said, there's a short-term and a long-term component to it.
Yeah. So he talked a lot about obviously some of the problems at the border wall, and he gave his typical speech about drugs and criminals, things like that. Do you feel like he won anybody over?
I felt that it was really a base speech, which is good and bad. It's good in that you're making sure that the people who voted for you stay with you, and his rhetoric certainly was meant towards that audience. The problem is the base was not, has not, and is not, was not, has not been, and is not 50%. It was 46%, and then in the last November midterm elections, 45% chose a Republican candidate. So in other words, there needs to be more conciliatory language to be able to expand the base to get to the 51% he needs to be reelected.
Yeah, so he needs to reach out a little bit.
Correct.
Yeah. So some polls, some recent polls have indicated that a majority of Americans believe that President Trump owns this government shutdown. Was the president successful at all convincing Americans that the Democratic lawmakers are to blame in this speech?
Well, he talked about it in terms of things he wants with regards to the border. My personal belief is that I think there should have been more of a conciliatory tone. In other words, saying, I'm more than willing to open the government up, rather. Here's what I need for it to be opened up. I didn't really see that effort at reaching out, which in my opinion is going to happen at some point or another. You can't keep the government closed indefinitely.
Right. You mentioned a conciliatory tone. It wasn't necessarily conciliatory, but it's something that everybody could relate to. He also talked about trade and agriculture, and he was there talking to farmers, so he may have gotten some political points from that aspect.
If you're connected to the agriculture industry, absolutely. And certainly it was a speech that once you got past talk about the border and you talked more about agriculture and trade and all that, he clearly was playing to his audience, which is the whole point of why he came down there to speak. But in my opinion, this should have been one of those types of talks where I would have been more conciliatory and reach out and use the agriculture as kind of a pivot point for kind of the broader scope of what I plan to do for the remaining 2 years of my term, and of course think ahead to the 2020 reelection.
So he won no points on the fight to get the $5 billion for his border wall or the shutdown. The
points he made to me were reiteration of points that would be acceptable and important to the base, but I didn't really see it going much beyond that.
Yeah, you mentioned some of it sounded like the first campaign speech.
Correct. He had used language which was reminiscent of the speech he gave when he went down the escalator in New York in 2015, which was talking about the countries who weren't weren't bringing their best and brightest to America. Well, there was almost a word-for-word reiteration of that original rhetoric. And to me, when you're talking about immigration, you have to be very careful because of the way it's perceived. I think it's more of a case of you have to reiterate that there are immigration laws that should be followed rather than making it appear, whether intentional or not, that you're putting down immigrants.
And if these polls get any worse for them, we'll have to see if any of that rhetoric or that language changes. John Couvion with JMC Analytics and Polling. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm joined now by State Representative Alan Seabaugh. He's a Republican from Shreveport. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, we have a couple of things that we want to talk about, but the first thing I want to talk about is something that sort of recently happened. You were selected for a federal judgeship position, and you were in the home stretch, and you asked the White House to remove your name. Why'd you do that?
That's great. I sent a letter to the White House last Thursday, basically thanking them for the offer and thanking Senator Cassidy and Senator Kennedy for the faith that they put in me, for putting me up for it, but saying no thanks. It was not something that we were at that time ready to go ahead and pursue. It really came down to the fact that it was dragging out. Our first meeting on the issue was actually before Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017. So we're 2 years into this. I was selected in February of 2018, and all the background checks and all were cleared in April of last year. So I've really just been sitting since April waiting for the nomination. And as it drug out through 2018, I didn't really care. We had the special sessions. I was doing my law practice, I'm living my life, and my wife kept saying, you know, is it bothering you that it's dragging out? And truthfully, it wasn't, because I was really happy where I was. And she finally came to me and said, if you're that happy that's not happening, do you really want the job? First time I really started thinking about it. But as it was getting ready to come into 2019, timing does matter, because we have special session, we have regular session coming up, and it's a re-election year. And I haven't had a fundraiser since I was selected. So I haven't had a fundraiser in over a year, and I'm in a re-election year. So if I'm gonna run for re-election, I've got to announce, and I've got to go ahead and start raising money. And there's no prohibition against raising money while going through the nomination and confirmation process. I just didn't feel right about it. And I was kind of a self-imposed. I didn't feel it was right to say, hey, I'm about to be a federal judge, give me money. So I quit raising money. As coming into an election year, that's not really an option. So we met with them a week or two before Christmas, and they couldn't give us any kind of definitive time frame on when it would happen. And so the best we could get was mid to late summer, or mid to late spring, excuse me, which means, and they're averaging about 7 months from nomination to swearing in. So that was going to go past qualifying, past election day. And we just at that point had to make a decision, and just decided for my family and for where we are right now, I genuinely enjoy my law practice. I enjoy the legislature. Louisiana is in a position where it needs help.
I heard that you want to run for Speaker of the
That's
House.
correct.
Okay, why do you want to do that?
Well, Louisiana is in need of conservative leadership in the legislature. We have, I've been a very vocal opponent of our governor since he came in. Well, even during, we served 5 years together in the House before he was governor, and we found ourselves on opposite side of a lot of issues. I've kind of positioned myself as a counterweight to the influence from the left coming from the governor and from the administration.
So much of a counterweight that I was there during the second special session, and it came to an end, and they were trying to push through some tax measures. You actually got up there and filibustered.
I did.
And, yeah, and you kept it from going through. The second special session ended. You came under a lot of fire for that, a lot of criticism. If you became Speaker, could we expect more of that level of fireworks?
Well, if I'm Speaker, I would do everything I could to keep an unconstitutional bill from making the floor. The reason I did that is that bill had a lot of problems, and there's no way it would have survived scrutiny had it been, it was the way, I don't want to get too technical, but the Louisiana Constitution prevents bills from having dual objects. And also the way it was amended was, there's no way it would have survived scrutiny in the court. So it was an unconstitutional bill. Plus it was an unnecessary tax increase, which made it a little bit easier. You know, everybody calls it a filibuster, and you know, technically I talked till midnight. I didn't get up till like 11:58. So it was a short filibuster, but it was
and you
successful.
admitted up there, you said, yes, I am trying to run out
That's
the clock.
exactly what I was trying to do. And in fact is, I almost did it in 2016, in the special session in 2016, when we passed a couple of bills in the final 2 minutes that were terrible, were devastating to the Louisiana economy. And I sat on my hands and I didn't do it in 2016, and I've regretted it ever since. That opportunity presented itself. I've been fighting the bill from the beginning. It was blatantly unconstitutional, and that opportunity presented itself, and I took the opportunity, and I really don't regret it at all. It was the right thing to do because we came back in another special session and ended up saving the state about $300 million.
All right. Well, we've run out of time. Representative Alan Seaball, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more of This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. Thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. I'll see you next Sunday right here on your local election headquarters.